aliens, gods from space. You've been lied to about the Anunnaki this entire time. While millions believe in spaceships and beings from another planet, the real story is buried in 4,000-year-old tablets that almost nobody bothered to actually read. And what do they reveal? A civilization so advanced it would make our technology look like child's play. But here's the detail that will blow your mind. They may have never left Earth. In the next few minutes, you'll discover the actual origins of the Anunnaki, straight from the original Sumerian sources, archaeological evidence that's been ignored, translations that were twisted, and a truth that's even more fascinating than any alien theory. But before I reveal what really happened 450,000 years ago, you need to forget everything you've ever heard about them, because the true story of the Anunnaki begins exactly where no one expected. It's darkness. Not the darkness of night, for night had not yet been born, but the absolute void that existed before existence itself took shape. In this nothingness, only Namu dwelled, the primeval sea, the first principle, neither male nor female, but the womb from which all things would emerge. Her waters stretched without boundary, without shore, without bottom, for there was nothing yet to contain or limit them. Within these endless depths, consciousness stirred, not thought as mortals would understand it, but the first dim awareness that something more than void might be possible. Namu's waters began to pulse with a rhythm that had no source yet contained all future heartbeats. She was becoming, though what she might become remained unwritten in the silence before time. The primeval waters shuddered. From their depths rose An, sovereign of the heavens, his form emerging like dawn, breaking over waters that had never known light. He stood upon nothing, yet stood firm, his eyes holding the blue of skies not yet formed, his breath carrying winds that had nowhere to blow. As he emerged, the first boundary came into being, the distinction between what was above and what lay below. But even as An established his presence, the waters stirred again. Kai rose to meet him, mistress of earth, solid where he was ethereal, dark where he blazed with celestial light. Her body was the promise of all lands, her essence the potential for every grain of soil that would support growing things. When they looked upon each other across the void, the universe held its breath in anticipation, and reached toward Kai, and she rose to meet his touch. Their embrace forged the first joining, the first unity that was not the simple oneness of Namu's undifferentiated waters. Where his celestial fire met her earthly darkness, sparks flew that would become stars. Where his breath touched her form, the first atmosphere took shape, not yet air as living things would breathe, but the possibility of air, the space between heaven and earth where life might one day flourish. From their union came Enlil, master of air and storm, born from the space his parents' embrace had fashioned. He emerged not as an infant, but as a force, the wind that would fill the gap between sky and earth, the breath that would animate all living things. Yet even as he took consciousness, he understood that their union had trapped him between them. With strength inherited from both parents, young Enlil placed his hands against An's chest and his feet against Kia's breast. He pushed with determination that would later characterize all his actions. The sound that emerged as heaven separated from earth was the first music, not melody as mortals would later forge, but the cosmic harmony of fundamental forces finding their proper relationships, and rose higher, becoming the remote sky that would wheel with stars and seasons. Ki settled deeper, becoming the stable earth that would support mountains and oceans. Between them stretched Enlil's domain, the atmosphere where weather would be born, where birds would fly, where the breath of life would sustain all creation. Through force, he had claimed his inheritance, establishing the precedent that power belonged to those strong enough to seize it. The cosmic birth continued as more celestial beings emerged from the continued interplay of these three primal forces. Enki rose from the sweet waters beneath Ki's surface, lord of wisdom and the underground springs that would nourish life. His domain lay hidden from sight, but essential to existence, the deep wells of knowledge and the flowing waters that connected all places. Ninhursag emerged as sovereign of mountain ranges and the fertility that would shape Ki's surface into landscapes suitable for life. Her strength was quiet but immense, the power of stone to endure, of soil to nurture, of patient growth that transforms barren rock into gardens. Where her influence touched the earth, the promise of abundance took root. The heavenly family continued expanding. Inanna blazed into existence as mistress of love and war, her dual nature reflecting the paradox that building and destroying spring from the same passionate source. Her beauty was terrible, her warfare fertile, and her love both blessing and curse for any who experienced it. Utu emerged as sovereign of the sun, his light bringing the first possibility of time as it would be measured by the alternation of day and night. His justice was as steady as his daily journey across the sky, illuminating truth and casting shadows that revealed deception. Through his radiance, the concept of reliability entered the cosmos. Nanna took shape as ruler of the moon, his cyclic nature bringing the promise of months and seasons, of renewal following decline, of light returning after darkness. His wisdom was the patience of long cycles, the understanding that all things change in their proper time. By his waxing and waning, the rhythm of longer periods entered existence. As these great powers took their forms and claimed their domains, they became aware of a need that transcended their individual abilities. The cosmos they had birthed through emergence and conflict was vast and complex, beyond any single will to govern effectively. Managing such intricate systems would require cooperation, consultation, the wisdom of many minds working together. From this recognition came the Anunnaki, not born as the great powers had been, but called into existence by conscious decision of the celestial family. 50 in number, they were designated as the Great Ones who would decree fate for all lesser beings. 300 more were fashioned as the Agigi, working powers whose task would be to carry out the decisions of their superiors. The assembly that formed when all these heavenly beings gathered was unlike anything the cosmos had yet witnessed, and took his place as supreme ruler, the sky sovereign whose authority derived from height and transcendence. Enlil positioned himself as the active executor, master of earth and air, whose power came from immediate control over the forces shaping daily existence. Enki arranged himself as the counselor, the one whose wisdom could solve problems that force could not overcome. His understanding of hidden connections and secret knowledge made him invaluable when the assembly faced complex decisions. Around these three, the other great powers positioned themselves according to their domains and relationships, forming a hierarchy that would govern celestial society. Yet even as this magnificent assembly took shape, fundamental questions remained unanswered. What would they rule? They had divided the cosmos among themselves, claimed territories, and established hierarchies. But except for their own glory, what was there to govern? Rulers required subjects, sovereigns needed those to command, and makers needed something to make that would justify their existence. The cosmos existed in ordered beauty, populated by the forces they controlled and the powers they had established, but it remained empty of conscious life. devoid of beings capable of recognizing the greatness of what had been achieved. Plants and animals would come later, cities and civilizations would follow, but first would come the question that would shape all future relationships between heaven and earth. What manner of beings should inhabit the realm they had forged? What creatures would serve their will while honoring their authority? How could they populate their cosmos without creating challenges to their supremacy? These questions would drive the next phase of cosmic development, leading to decisions whose consequences would echo through all subsequent ages. The foundation had been established. The cosmic family had emerged and claimed their domains. The hierarchy of heaven had taken shape with its councils and assemblies. Now came the time for action, for the great works that would transform their ordered void into a realm worthy of their governance. The age of making was about to begin, though none yet imagined the complexity of what lay ahead. As cosmic cycles turned in their newly established patterns, An and Ki's union continued bearing fruit, bringing forth powers whose diverse natures would shape every aspect of reality, taking form around them. Each new emergence added complexity to celestial hierarchy, creating relationships that would define governance of all existence. From Ki's fertile depths came Ninhursag, mountain mother whose strength would give shape to formless earth. Where her essence touched primordial landscape, hills rose and valleys carved themselves into welcoming curves. Her domain encompassed more than geography. She transformed barren stone into life-giving soil, bringing forth conditions necessary for abundance. Ancient tablets from Nippur speak of her first act upon taking consciousness. She gazed across flat expanse of early earth and found it insufficient for complex life that cosmic wisdom suggested would emerge. With patient determination, she began creating landscape diversity, raising some areas while allowing others to remain low, establishing drainage patterns that would channel Enki's waters where needed most. From brilliant merger of An's celestial fire and Ki's nurturing embrace came Inanna, whose dual nature as goddess of love and warfare would make her perhaps most complex of all powers. She blazed into existence with intensity that made even other celestial beings shield their eyes, her beauty both irresistible and terrifying in its perfection. Unlike her siblings' gradual emergence, Inanna appeared suddenly, fully formed and burning with ambitions that would challenge established order from her first breath. Her very presence introduced passionate desire into a cosmos that had previously operated according to purely rational principles. Utu emerged next, claiming dominion over light, justice, and time's measurement. His steady radiance brought order to day and night distinction, establishing rhythm that would govern all future activities. More than mere illumination, Utu represented reliability, the promise that certain things could be counted upon to remain constant, even as everything else changed. His light revealed truths that darkness had hidden, making him naturally suited to become cosmic judge whose decisions would settle disputes among celestials and mortals yet to come. Fairness entered the universe through his steady gaze, which fell equally upon all beings, regardless of station or power. Nana followed, bringing gentler moonlight and longer cycles marking seasons and years. Where Utu's light was constant and revealing, Nana's was cyclic and mysterious, waxing and waning in patterns speaking to deeper rhythms underlying existence. Through his changes, the cosmos learned that apparent endings were transformations, that decline contained within itself renewal's seeds. Divine family continued expanding as specialized powers emerged to oversee specific aspects of increasingly complex reality. Ninurta arose as champion and warrior, his strength dedicated to protecting cosmic order against any threatening forces. His domain included not only warfare, but courage, required to face necessary changes, determination to see difficult tasks through completion. From depths came Ereshkigal, mistress of Underworld realm, that would receive all things when their time above had ended. Her emergence established that even in a cosmos ruled by immortal powers, boundaries existed that must be respected. Her authority over death and afterlife provided counterbalance, preventing upper realms from becoming overcrowded with beings who had outlived usefulness. As each new power took their place in expanding celestial hierarchy, relationships of cooperation and competition began developing. Enlil found himself drawn to his role as active administrator of cosmic will, translating lofty council decisions into practical actions shaping daily existence. His command over storms and weather made him indispensable for maintaining atmospheric conditions supporting life. Enki developed into cosmic problem solver, whose wisdom could find solutions when straightforward approaches proved inadequate. His control over underground waters gave access to hidden knowledge, secret connections linking seemingly disparate phenomena. Where Enlil's methods were direct and forceful, Enki's were subtle and comprehensive. This relationship between half-brothers would prove crucial for future developments. Enlil represented order imposed from above, clear hierarchies, established procedures, obedience to proper authority. Enki embodied wisdom that adapted to changing circumstances, flexible responses, creative solutions, respect for unintended consequences, complexity. Their different approaches became apparent during their first great collaborative project. Cosmos they had established possessed beauty and order, but lacked dynamic quality that would make it truly alive. They had created magnificent stage, but it remained empty of worthy actors. Enlil proposed direct solution to this deficiency. Cosmos required inhabitants who could appreciate what powers had achieved, beings capable of providing recognition and worship that cosmic sovereignty deserved. Such creatures should be fashioned according to clear specifications, designed to fulfill roles efficiently without creating complications for creators. Enki's response revealed fundamental difference in their thinking. Any beings intelligent enough to appreciate celestial achievement would also be capable of independent thought, meaning they might develop ideas and desires of their own. Creating such creatures would introduce unpredictable variables into carefully ordered system they had established. First serious disagreement among powers followed, setting precedents for how future conflicts would be managed, and presided with detached authority of supreme height, while other powers contributed perspectives based on individual domains and concerns. Inanna strongly supported creating intelligent inhabitants, arguing that beings incapable of choice could not provide meaningful worship. True recognition required possibility of rejection. Genuine love demanded freedom to withhold affection. Only creatures capable of saying no could make their yes meaningful. Utu emphasized need for beings capable of understanding justice and law, who could serve as agents of cosmic order in material realm. His light revealed truth, but truth required minds capable of recognizing it and hearts committed to acting upon it. Gradually, consensus emerged around principle that cosmos would benefit from intelligent inhabitants, but such beings must be created with appropriate limitations preventing them from challenging celestial authority. Still, even as they planned this great work, another issue demanded attention. Magnificent cosmos they had established required constant maintenance to function according to design. Someone needed to dig irrigation channels, tend growing plants, and perform countless daily tasks, keeping complex system operating smoothly. Igigi had been fashioned specifically for this purpose. but their enthusiasm for endless labor was showing strain. Though they continued performing assigned duties, careful observers could detect growing weariness in movements, increasing reluctance in responses to new assignments. Working powers had been created to serve, but they had also been given enough intelligence to recognize disparity between their endless toil and their superiors' comfortable existence. While maintaining outward obedience, private conversations began occurring during brief rest periods. Quiet discussions about whether current arrangement truly represented best possible organization of cosmic resources. These whispered exchanges remained carefully hidden from great powers, who were increasingly absorbed in governing complexities and planning next creative ventures. Stage was being set for first serious challenge to cosmic order they had worked so carefully to establish. Divine family had taken shape, with each member claiming domains and developing relationships that would define celestial politics for all future ages. Hierarchy was established, roles were assigned, and great work of cosmic governance was proceeding according to plan. But beneath smooth surface of celestial harmony, tensions were building that would soon transform everything they had built. Bronze tools rang against stone as 300 Igigi carved channels through the primordial earth, their backs bent under the weight of cosmic ambition. For countless cycles they had labored without rest, digging irrigation systems that would carry Enki's sweet waters across the landscape, building the infrastructure that would support the grand vision taking shape in the divine assembly above. But something had changed in their movements. Where once they worked with enthusiasm born of purpose, now their strikes grew mechanical, their conversations muted. In whispered exchanges during brief rest periods, questions began forming that would soon shake the foundations of celestial order. "We build their paradise while dwelling in dust," one worker muttered, his hands bleeding from constant contact with rough stone. "When does our service end and our reward begin?" High above their toil, the 50 Anunnaki gathered in magnificent assembly, their voices rising in harmonies that had never echoed through creation before. Each power had grown into their domain during the cycles since emergence, developing specialized knowledge that would prove essential for the systematic governance they now envisioned. Enki stepped forward, his robes glistening with moisture from the underground springs that had become his realm. Where his feet touched earth, sweet water bubbled forth, demonstrating the hidden connections that his wisdom had revealed during long contemplation in the depths. "We have claimed territories and established authority," he began, his voice carrying the whisper of flowing streams. "But raw power cannot sustain the complex reality we seek to build. Order requires principles that function beyond our immediate presence, laws that govern when we are absent, systems that maintain themselves." Enlil descended from storm-racked skies, winds swirling around him as he addressed the assembly. His domains stretched between heaven and earth, making him the natural bridge between An's celestial authority and the practical needs of the surface realm. "Brother speaks truth. We possess strength to reshape existence according to our will, but strength without system breeds chaos. Every force we unleash must serve coherent purpose." From this recognition came their most ambitious innovation, divine principles that would govern all aspects of reality without requiring constant intervention. Like Enki's underground springs, these cosmic laws would flow invisibly through existence, maintaining order automatically, and contributed the frameworks of supreme authority, ensuring that power would always flow downward from established hierarchies. Enlil provided principles of executive action, translating celestial decisions into material effects. Enki offered the laws of wisdom and adaptation, recognizing that rigid systems eventually shatter under unforeseen pressures. Inanna blazed forward to claim the principles governing love and warfare, the passionate forces that would drive all future development. Her contributions ensured that both attraction and conflict would serve constructive purposes, building rather than merely destroying. Utu's steady radiance illuminated the concepts of justice and law, establishing standards that would enable civilized societies to function fairly. Nana provided the rhythms of ritual and timekeeping, coordinating human activities with natural cycles through appropriate ceremonies. As each power contributed specialized knowledge, their divine framework grew into comprehensive governance, addressing every aspect of existence they could imagine. More than laws, these principles possessed self-enforcing capacity, building consequences into reality's fabric that would respond automatically to violations. With cosmic law established, territories required assignment among the expanded hierarchy. Mountain ranges came under Ninhursag's authority, their peaks rising according to her vision of elevated terrain supporting Enlil's atmospheric systems. Rivers flowed according to Enki's design, carrying sweet water to locations where it would eventually nourish life yet to be created. Inanna claimed the cities that would rise from landscape, centers of civilization, where her dual nature would drive human development through both cooperation and competition. Specialized powers received authority over natural phenomena, winds and storms, seasonal changes, fertility of growing things. But even as they celebrated their administrative achievement, practical problems demanded attention. Their magnificent designs required enormous labor to implement. Theoretical frameworks needed transformation into functioning reality through countless physical tasks. Below the divine assembly, Igigi resentment was crystallizing into something far more dangerous than mere fatigue. Conversations that had begun as complaints about working conditions were evolving into fundamental questions about cosmic justice. "They speak of order and law," whispered one worker to his companions. "But what law places all burden upon the few for benefit of the many? What justice condemns us to eternal servitude while they feast in celestial comfort?" Another voice joined the growing chorus of discontent. "We carved the channels that carry life across their realm. We built the foundations supporting their glory. When do we receive recognition for achievements they claim as their own?" The questions spread through the workforce like underground streams connecting distant springs. Each shift brought new grievances. Each rest period sparked fresh discussions about whether their current situation truly represented the best arrangement of cosmic resources. Leadership among the Igigi began emerging organically. Workers whose eloquence gave voice to shared frustrations, whose courage enabled them to speak truths others only whispered. They began organizing, coordinating, planning actions that would force their concerns to receive proper attention from powers who had grown comfortable ignoring subordinate welfare. Above them, the divine assembly continued refining their administrative masterpiece, confident that their creation represented the pinnacle of cosmic achievement. They had established comprehensive governance, assigned appropriate responsibilities, created legal frameworks maintaining order across vast distances and extended time periods. What they had not anticipated was that intelligence sufficient for complex tasks might also prove capable of questioning fundamental assumptions. The same mental capacity that enabled Igigi to understand sophisticated engineering projects could also evaluate the fairness of arrangements governing their existence. Enki, whose wisdom encompassed hidden connections others missed, began detecting subtle changes in the cosmic atmosphere. His underground springs brought him information from across the realm, whispers of growing tension that his colleagues had not yet recognized. During private moments with his closest advisors, he expressed concerns about sustainability of current labor arrangements. The workforce shows signs of strain that simple commands cannot address. Intelligence capable of building our vision may also be capable of resisting endless exploitation. But his warnings received little attention from powers absorbed in celebrating their organizational achievements. Enlil dismissed worker complaints as temporary adjustment difficulties that would resolve once proper discipline was enforced, and remained focused on cosmic governance, considering labor issues beneath the attention of supreme authority. Meanwhile, Igigi organization continued developing in secret, their meetings hidden in the depths of excavation sites, their planning concealed within the rhythm of daily work. They were approaching decisions that would transform celestial civilization, though none among the ruling powers recognized the magnitude of change approaching their carefully ordered cosmos. The age of automatic obedience was ending. The age of divine politics and competing visions was about to explode into open conflict that would reshape everything the powers had built together. Fire and tools clattered to the ground as 300 voices rose in unified defiance. The sound echoed across the cosmic realm like thunder. But this storm came from below, not from Enlil's heavenly domain. After countless cycles of endless labor, the Igigi had reached their breaking point. "No more," their leader shouted, casting aside the bronze spade that had carved countless irrigation channels. "We were not born to be eternal slaves. If the Great Ones require workers, let them dirty their own hands with soil and stone." Across the realm, working powers abandoned their posts simultaneously, leaving half-finished projects scattered like broken promises. Canals lay incomplete, temples stood as skeletal frameworks, and the grand infrastructure, supporting divine comfort, ground to a halt. In the celestial assembly, panic spread faster than wildfire. Never before had the established hierarchy faced such organized resistance. Powers who had grown comfortable with automatic obedience suddenly confronted subjects who possessed both intelligence and will. Enlil's rage manifested as storms that blackened the sky, his winds howling with fury at this unprecedented challenge to cosmic order. But Enki, whose wisdom had long warned of this possibility, stepped forward with a different perspective. "Perhaps we have forgotten something crucial, that beings intelligent enough to serve effectively may also be intelligent enough to question their servitude," and descended from his celestial heights for emergency consultation, his presence filling the assembly with the gravity of supreme authority. Hours of heated debate followed as powers struggled to find solutions that would restore order without acknowledging the legitimacy of Igigi complaints. Enki's proposal cut through the arguments with elegant simplicity. "We require workers, but perhaps not these workers. What if we created beings specifically designed for labor, intelligent enough to understand complex tasks, yet limited enough to remain content with their assigned role?" The concept of humanity was born from divine necessity rather than divine benevolence. These new creatures would bridge the gap between animal instinct and celestial intelligence, possessing just enough consciousness to perform sophisticated work without developing the philosophical questions that had led to rebellion. Working together, the powers began fashioning mortals from clay, mixed with divine breath. Each contributed elements from their domain. Enlil provided air for life. Enki supplied wisdom for understanding. Ninhursag shaped forms capable of growth and reproduction. The first humans emerged blinking into existence, their eyes holding wonder at the magnificent realm around them. Unlike the Igigi, who had been created fully aware of cosmic politics, These beings began with innocence that made them naturally reverent toward their creators. But divine creation required more than willing workers. It needed proper organization. Humans would require guidance, leadership, and structures that could channel their efforts effectively while maintaining cosmic order. From this necessity came kingship descending from heaven. Rather than ruling mortals directly, the powers would govern through chosen intermediaries who possessed both human understanding and divine authority. These priest kings would translate celestial will into earthly action. Eridu rose as the first city, its foundations laid according to plans drawn in the celestial assembly. Enki claimed it as his earthly seat, establishing the first temple where heaven and earth would meet through ritual and sacrifice. The settlement's location, above Sweetwater Springs, made it the perfect nexus between divine and mortal realms. Ancient tablets record the moment when kingship first descended from heaven to earth. Alulim became the first ruler. His authority derived not from human choice, but from divine appointment. His crown was fashioned in celestial workshops, his scepter blessed by the assembled powers, his reign legitimized by direct connection to cosmic order. Under divine guidance, humans began learning civilization's arts. Enki taught them irrigation techniques that would transform barren landscapes into fertile gardens. Ninhursag showed them agriculture, the patient cultivation of crops sustaining growing populations. Inanna introduced warfare and statecraft, skills necessary for building and defending organized communities. The relationship between powers and mortals during this golden age differed fundamentally from the distant governance characterizing later periods. Divine beings walked among humans daily, sharing meals at royal banquets, participating in seasonal festivals, and personally overseeing celestial decisions implementation. Enlil established his cult center at Nippur, the city that would become the religious heart of emerging civilization. His temple, the Ekur, rose as a mountain of brick and stone reaching toward heaven, its ziggurat form expressing the cosmic principle that earth should stretch upward to meet sky. Inanna claimed Uruk as her earthly domain, transforming it into a center of culture and power that would influence human development for millennia. Her temple precinct, the Inanna, became the stage for elaborate ceremonies, celebrating both love and warfare, the dual forces driving all human achievement. Each major power established similar earthly seats, creating a network of sacred cities that mirrored celestial society's organization. These urban centers became laboratories where divine principles could be tested and refined through practical application to human affairs. The experiment proved remarkably successful. Humans displayed exactly the combination of intelligence and obedience their creators had sought. They could understand complex instructions, adapt to changing circumstances, and take initiative in solving problems, yet remained fundamentally reverent toward the powers governing their existence. Most importantly, they provided worship that cosmic sovereignty required. Their temples rang with hymns of praise, their altars burned with offerings sustaining divine presence, and their festivals recreated the mythic events establishing cosmic order. Through human recognition, powers received validation that mere force could never provide. But even as this golden age flourished, subtle changes were occurring in the relationship between heaven and earth. Powers found themselves spending increasing time in human society, drawn by the immediate satisfaction of direct worship and personal recognition. Their celestial court, while maintaining supreme authority, began feeling distant from the vibrant life developing in earthly cities. Some powers adapted to this shift more easily than others. Inanna thrived on human passion and conflict, finding endless fascination in the dramas playing out within her city walls. Enki enjoyed teaching mortals new skills, watching them develop techniques enhancing their ability to work with natural forces. Enlil, however, grew increasingly concerned about the implications of divine involvement in human affairs. As Lord of Cosmic Order, he recognized that too much intimacy between powers and mortals might undermine the hierarchical structure maintaining stability. Authority required distance, respect demanded mystery, and effective governance needed clear boundaries between ruler and ruled. His concerns would prove prophetic as human society continued developing along paths the powers had not fully anticipated. The intelligence they had granted mortals was already generating innovations and ideas extending beyond original divine intentions. Seeds of future complications were taking root in their creative experiments' very success. Above in heaven, the Igigi watched these developments with complex emotions. Their rebellion had achieved partial success. They were no longer required to perform endless manual labor. But their replacement by humans left them uncertain about their role in the evolving cosmic order, suspended between ruling powers and mortal beings who now served divine will. The first age of direct divine rule had begun, bringing unprecedented prosperity and harmony to both heaven and earth. But within that success lay potential for new conflicts, as increasing complexity created opportunities for misunderstanding and disagreement that would test the foundations of everything they had built together. Inanna stood at the gates of Uruk, her city thriving under her dual nature as mistress of love and war. But prosperity brought restlessness, and the goddess who embodied passionate ambition found herself yearning for something her domain lacked. Across the landscape, Eridu glowed with ancient power that made her own achievements seem incomplete. In Enki's sacred city, the divine decrees lay stored like treasures in temple depths, the fundamental powers governing every aspect of civilization. These cosmic principles controlled kingship and priesthood, warfare and music, craftsmanship and law. Whoever possessed them could shape human society according to their vision. The thought consumed Inanna, with desire that burned brighter than her fury in battle. Why should Enki hoard these gifts in his underwater palace, while human potential remained stunted? Why should powers that could elevate mortals gather dust in Enki's private chambers? Donning her most magnificent robes, Inanna set forth for Eridu, with the pretense of a familial visit. Her boat cut through waters connecting the sacred cities, its wake shimmering with anticipation of what was to come. Enki welcomed his granddaughter with warmth that had always characterized their relationship. His palace beneath the sweet waters reflected his nature, flowing chambers that shifted like currents, halls decorated with patterns that seemed to move in flickering lamplight. "Beloved Inanna," Enki greeted her, genuine affection making his eyes sparkle. "Your presence brings joy to these ancient halls. Come, let us feast together and share news of our respective domains." The banquet that followed was a masterpiece of divine hospitality. Enki's servants brought forth delicacies from across the realm, fruits that grew only in celestial gardens, wines pressed from grapes blessed by sunlight that never touched mortal earth, honey carrying the essence of flowers blooming in eternal spring. As the evening progressed, Inanna proved herself a charming companion, regaling her host with tales of Uruk's growing glory, while skillfully ensuring his cup never remained empty. Her conversations sparkled with wit and wisdom, her laughter rang with genuine warmth, and her beauty illuminated the underwater palace like captured starlight. Enki, whose wisdom encompassed all knowledge, except perhaps the depth of his granddaughter's ambition, found himself relaxing in her presence. The beer flowed freely, each cup loosening his tongue, and clouding his normally sharp judgment. The burdens of cosmic governance seemed lighter, the weight of accumulated ages lifted by youthful enthusiasm. "Uncle," Inanna said as the night deepened, her voice carrying just the right note of respectful curiosity. "The mortals speak of great powers hidden in your sanctuary, gifts that could elevate human civilization beyond its current limitations. Surely such wonders exist only in their imagination." Enki's chest swelled with pride, his judgment clouded by divine beer and the pleasure of having an appreciative audience. "Ah, granddaughter, if you only knew the treasures I have gathered here. The very foundations of civilized existence rest within these walls." Rising unsteadily, Enki gestured toward the inner sanctum, where the divine decrees were stored. "Would you see them? Would you understand the true scope of what I have accomplished?" Inanna's heart raced with triumph, but she maintained an expression of innocent wonder as she followed her uncle into the sacred chamber. There, arranged in careful order, lay the powers that governed every aspect of human development. Tangible forces that could be touched, held, and most importantly, taken. "Behold," Enki proclaimed, his words slurring slightly as he lifted the first decree, "the divine power of kingship itself. Through this, mortals learn to govern themselves according to celestial principles." "Magnificent," the goddess breathed, her eyes wide with apparently artless admiration. One by one, the god of wisdom displayed the sacred decrees: warfare and peace, music and craftsmanship, fertility and abundance, justice and judgment. Each revelation increased her apparent wonder, while deepening her host's satisfaction in sharing his treasures with someone who could truly appreciate their significance. "Surely," the young power said softly, "such powers should not remain hidden in the depths. Would it not serve cosmic order better if they were distributed more widely, used to elevate mortal civilization to heights worthy of divine attention?" The Lord of Sweet Waters, his wisdom thoroughly clouded by alcohol and affection, nodded enthusiastically. In his intoxicated generosity, he began loading the divine decrees into his granddaughter's hands, each transfer accompanied by effusive explanations of their proper use and cosmic significance. "Take them," the ancient god declared expansively. "Let your city become the center of human achievement. Let these powers find their proper expression through your wise guidance." The cunning deity needed no second invitation. With dignity that concealed her racing pulse, she carefully gathered the sacred decrees and made her way to her boat. Her retinue worked swiftly and silently to secure their precious cargo, understanding that speed might prove essential. The boat of heaven cut through the waters, with supernatural swiftness, carrying its divine passenger and her freely given treasures toward Uruk. Behind them, the underwater palace gradually returned to normal rhythms as the Master of Wisdom settled into contented sleep. Dawn brought sobriety and horror in equal measure. The Lord of the Depths awakened to find his sanctuary stripped of its most precious contents, his granddaughter nowhere to be found, and his servants trembling with fear at their master's discovery. "What have I done?" he whispered, the full scope of his alcohol-induced generosity becoming clear. The powers that took ages to gather, distributed in a moment of weakness. His rage shook Eridu's foundations, causing fish to flee the sacred waters and birds to abandon their nests. But even as fury consumed him, practical wisdom began asserting itself. The decrees were gone, but perhaps they could still be recovered. Summoning his fastest servants, the furious deity dispatched them to overtake his granddaughter's boat before it could reach Uruk. These divine messengers flew across the waters with speed that challenged the wind itself, their forms barely visible as they closed the distance. But the fleeing goddess had anticipated pursuit. Her own boat possessed divine properties that enabled it to match any speed her uncle's servants could achieve. When they drew near, she called upon the very powers she had taken, using the decree of warfare to defend her prize, the decree of cunning to outwit her pursuers. The chase that followed became the stuff of legend, divine forces clashing above the waters as the ambitious power fought to retain what she had won, while the pursuing agents struggled to recover what had been lost. But the goddess of war and love proved equal to every challenge, her determination fueled by visions of what she could accomplish. As Uruk's walls came into sight, the triumphant deity's victory became complete. The divine decrees would find their home in her temple, transforming her city into the center of human civilization. Arts and crafts would flourish under her guidance. Music would celebrate her glory, and warfare would spread her influence across the known world. The pursuit finally ceased at Uruk's gates, the servants acknowledging defeat in the face of their quarry's determination and divine protection. The wise god was forced to accept that his granddaughter had outmaneuvered him completely, turning his own generous nature against him. In the aftermath of this cosmic theft, relationships among the divine family underwent fundamental transformation. The ancient lord's trust in his relatives suffered permanent damage, while the victorious goddess's status rose dramatically through her acquisition of powers that had previously been concentrated in a single location. The divine decrees began their work immediately, transforming Uruk from a prosperous city into the beating heart of human civilization. Under her guidance, mortals achieved heights of artistic and cultural development that amazed even their divine creators. But with these gifts came new complications. As human ambition began approaching levels that would soon challenge celestial supremacy itself, thunder rolled across the divine assembly as Enlil's voice shook the foundations of heaven itself. His fury at recent events had reached a breaking point that threatened to tear apart the cosmic order the powers had worked so carefully to establish. Across from him, Enki maintained the calm demeanor that had always characterized his approach to conflict. But beneath his surface composure, currents of defiance ran deeper than his underground springs. "Brother," Enlil began, his words crackling with barely contained lightning. "Your actions have disrupted the balance we swore to maintain. First, you enable the Igigi rebellion through your misguided sympathy. Now you allow our granddaughter to steal the very foundations of civilized governance. Where does your meddling end?" The Lord of Storms paced before the assembled Anunnaki, his agitation manifesting as wind patterns that sent lesser powers scrambling to maintain their dignity. His domain over earth and atmosphere gave weight to his words that none could ignore, even those who disagreed with his conclusions. Enki rose from his position with the fluid grace that marked all his movements. His response carried the patient wisdom of underground streams that wore away the hardest stone through persistent flow rather than violent impact. Brother speaks of balance, but what balance places rigid order above adaptable justice? The Igigi served faithfully until their service became slavery. Our granddaughter sought powers that could elevate human civilization to heights worthy of divine attention. In both cases, I chose wisdom over blind adherence to authority. The philosophical divide that had always existed between the half-brothers now erupted into open conflict before the entire assembly. Enlil represented the principle of cosmic hierarchy, maintained through strict obedience to established power. Order descended from above through clear chains of command, and stability required that subordinates accept their assigned roles without question. The god of wisdom embodied a different approach to governance, flexible response to changing circumstances, recognition that intelligence inevitably led to questions about justice, an understanding that sustainable authority must rest on consent rather than mere force. Around them, the other powers aligned themselves according to their own natures and interests, and observed from his celestial throne with the detached concern of supreme authority, recognizing that this dispute could fracture the unity upon which cosmic governance depended. Inanna, whose recent acquisition of the divine decrees had elevated her status dramatically, found herself at the center of attention she had always craved. Her success in outmaneuvering Enki had demonstrated that established power structures could be challenged successfully, inspiring other ambitious deities to reconsider their own positions in the hierarchy. The ancient arrangements serve the past, she declared, her voice carrying the confidence of recent victory. But the cosmos evolves, mortals advance, and governance must adapt or become irrelevant. The decrees I now possess will be used to elevate human civilization, not to maintain outdated systems. Utu, whose steady nature made him naturally conservative, sided with his grandfather's emphasis on maintaining established order. His light revealed truth without variation, and he believed cosmic governance should follow the same principle of reliable consistency. Change without direction leads to chaos, he observed, his radiance casting sharp shadows that emphasized the stark choices facing the assembly. The structures we have established serve purposes greater than individual ambition. Abandoning them serves neither cosmic order nor mortal welfare. Nana offered a different perspective, his cyclic nature giving him appreciation for both stability and transformation. Perhaps both approaches serve necessary functions, he suggested, his voice waxing and waning like his light. Rigid order provides foundation, while adaptive wisdom enables growth. The question is not which principle should dominate, but how they can work together. But the fundamental tension between Enlil and his brother had grown too deep for easy compromise. Their dispute encompassed more than administrative philosophy. It reflected competing visions of what cosmic governance should accomplish and how divine authority should be exercised. The Lord of Storms saw the cosmos as a magnificent machine that required careful maintenance of all its parts. Each component had been designed for specific purposes. An optimal function demanded that everything operate according to original specifications. Deviation from established procedures threatened the entire system's stability. The master of sweet waters viewed existence as a living organism that must adapt to survive. Intelligence inevitably generated new circumstances that rigid systems could not accommodate. Survival required flexibility. Growth demanded innovation, and sustainable governance must evolve along with its subjects. As their debate continued, other divine conflicts began surfacing throughout the assembly. Ninhursag questioned whether her authority over fertility should be limited to agricultural cycles, or whether she should actively intervene to increase human populations that could provide more elaborate worship. Ninurta proposed expanding his role as divine champion to include direct military intervention in human conflicts, using celestial power to ensure that wars served divine purposes rather than merely mortal ambitions. Ereshkigal, whose authority over the Underworld had been established but never fully tested, wondered whether her domain should expand to include judgment over divine beings who violated cosmic law, not merely mortal souls who had completed their earthly existence. Each question revealed how the success of their cosmic experiment had generated complications none had anticipated. Creating intelligent beings capable of meaningful service inevitably led to situations requiring divine response to unprecedented circumstances. The Assembly's deliberations stretched across multiple cycles as powers struggled to reconcile their competing visions with practical necessities. Some sought to impose stricter control over human development, limiting mortal capabilities to prevent future challenges to celestial authority. Others argued for allowing human civilization to develop according to its own trajectory, confident that divine oversight could guide its evolution without stifling the innovation that made mortals valuable servants. Still others proposed intermediate approaches that would maintain essential cosmic hierarchy while permitting controlled experimentation with new arrangements that might better serve all parties' interests. But beneath these policy debates lay deeper questions about the nature of authority itself. Could power maintain legitimacy solely through force, or did sustainable governance require the consent of the governed? Could divine rule adapt to changing circumstances without compromising its fundamental nature? The rivalry between Enlil and Enki had exposed fault lines in celestial society that no amount of discussion could easily repair. Their competing approaches to governance would continue generating conflicts as long as both maintained their positions within the cosmic hierarchy. As the Assembly concluded without reaching definitive resolution, each power returned to their domain, carrying questions that would influence their future decisions. The age of simple obedience to cosmic order was ending, replaced by an era of competing visions and complex politics that would test every relationship within the divine family. Consequences of their dispute were already manifesting in ways that would soon demand new responses to unprecedented challenges. Enlil lay sleepless in his celestial palace, his rest shattered by the endless clamor rising from the earth below. What had begun as the pleasant hum of thriving civilization had grown into a cacophony that penetrated even the highest reaches of heaven. Human voices multiplied like summer insects, their chatter and laughter, their arguments and celebrations creating a constant din that made peaceful repose impossible. Night after night, the Lord of Storms tossed upon his divine couch, pressing pillows against his ears in futile attempts to block the noise. But mortal sounds seemed to possess a quality that passed through any barrier, reaching into the very core of celestial consciousness with their persistent, chaotic energy. How did they become so numerous? Enlil muttered, rising from his bed to pace the marble floors of his chamber. How did their voices grow so loud that they disturbed the peace of heaven itself? Below on earth, humanity had indeed multiplied beyond the power's original expectations. Cities expanded across the landscape like ripples spreading from stones dropped in still water. Children played in streets that echoed with their laughter. Markets buzzed with the constant negotiation of trade, and workshops rang with the sounds of craftsmen pursuing the arts Inanna had brought from Eridu. But what mortals celebrated as prosperity, their celestial ruler experienced as torment. Each new birth added another voice to the chorus that made his rest impossible. Every festival meant increased revelry that penetrated his domain. Each expansion of civilization brought more disturbance to the cosmic tranquility he had once enjoyed. The breaking point came during the spring celebrations, when all the cities honored the powers simultaneously. Thousands of voices rose in songs of praise. Drums thundered in elaborate processions, and the joyful noise of human gratitude created a sound that seemed to shake the very pillars supporting heaven. Enlil strode into the assembly chamber, his fury manifesting as storm clouds that darkened the celestial dome. The gathered Anunnaki fell silent as their leader's rage filled the space with the electricity of approaching tempest. "Enough!" he roared, his voice drowning out even the distant sounds of earthly celebration. The experiment has failed. Humanity has grown beyond acceptable limits. Their noise makes governance impossible. Their numbers threaten cosmic balance, and their presumption grows daily more intolerable. The assembled powers shifted uneasily as their leader's proposal became clear. Destruction on such a scale had never been contemplated since the ordering of the cosmos began. Wiping out entire civilizations would undo generations of careful development, erasing achievements that had brought both satisfaction and glory to their creators. "Brother," Enki began carefully, his voice carrying the measured tones of underground currents. "Surely the situation calls for correction rather than annihilation. These mortals serve us faithfully, maintaining our temples and providing the worship that validates our authority. Their service has become disruption," the Storm Lord replied, winds swirling around him as his agitation increased. "Their worship has become clamor that destroys the peace necessary for proper governance. They must be silenced before their noise drives us to madness." The debate that followed revealed fundamental differences in how the powers viewed their relationship with the beings they had created. Some sided with Enlil's position that mortals existed solely to serve celestial convenience, and when that service became inconvenient, the logical solution was replacement with more suitable alternatives. Others supported Enki's argument that intelligence inevitably led to increased activity, and that destroying successful civilizations merely because they displayed vitality seemed counterproductive to the cosmic development they all supposedly desired. And presided over the discussion with the distant authority of supreme height, but even his usual detachment could not completely mask concern about the precedent they were considering. Once destruction was accepted as a solution to inconvenience, what would prevent future applications of the same principle to other problems? But Enlil's fury had reached proportions that made rational discussion increasingly difficult. His storms raged across the assembly hall, his lightning-illuminated faces strained by the intensity of emotions no longer contained by diplomatic courtesy. "The decision is made," he declared with finality that brooked no further argument. "The waters will rise, the rains will fall, and the earth will be cleansed of the chaos humanity has brought to our ordered realm. Let silence return to the cosmos." The vote that followed was closer than Enlil had anticipated, but his supporters ultimately prevailed. The great deluge would come, sweeping away the civilizations that had grown too noisy for celestial comfort. Only then could the powers return to the tranquility that proper governance required. As the assembly dispersed to prepare for the coming destruction, Enki lingered in the emptying hall, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. The wise god understood that his brother's solution would indeed restore celestial peace, but at a cost that might prove greater than any of them realized. In the depths of his wisdom, dark currents of rebellion began to flow. The god who valued justice above authority was about to face the greatest moral crisis of his existence, whether to honor the assembly's decision or to follow the deeper principles that made life meaningful. Above him, storm clouds gathered as Enlil began marshalling the forces that would bring the great cleansing. Below, unsuspecting mortals continued their daily lives, unaware that their celestial protectors had become their greatest threat. The age of direct divine blessing was ending. The age of survival against cosmic wrath was about to begin. Reeds whispered secrets in the wind as Enki knelt beside the humble hut where Ziusudra offered his daily prayers. The god of wisdom had wrestled with his conscience through sleepless nights, watching storm clouds gather as his brother prepared instruments of total destruction. Now, with time running short, he had made his choice between loyalty to the assembly and loyalty to justice itself. Reed Hut, Enki whispered to the wall, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze. Wall, listen and pay attention. The assembly has decreed calamity beyond imagination. Waters will rise from every source. Rains will fall without mercy, and the earth will be cleansed of all life that walks upon it. Inside the dwelling, Zeusudra froze at the strange voice speaking through his walls. As the most righteous ruler among mortals, he had always maintained careful observance of ritual obligations, but never before had divinity addressed him so directly. Build a vessel, the hidden voice continued, its urgency unmistakable despite its gentle tone. 7 days wide, 7 days long, 7 decks high. Seal it with bitumen, stock it with provisions, and gather the seed of all living things. When the waters come, you alone shall survive to restore what will be lost. The warning delivered, the wise god departed as quietly as he had come, leaving behind only the faint scent of sweet water and the echo of words that would preserve life itself through the coming catastrophe. 7 days later, the deluge began. Enlil unleashed the full fury of his atmospheric domain, calling forth rains that fell like spears hurled by invisible armies. Water poured from the sky with violence that shattered rooftops and flooded streets in moments. But celestial rain was only the beginning of the destruction the Lord of Storms had planned. From beneath the earth, underground springs burst forth with pressure that split stones and uprooted ancient trees. The sweet waters Enki controlled were turned against his will into instruments of devastation, their life-giving nature transformed into agents of annihilation. Rivers overflowed their banks with currents that swept away entire settlements. Adad, master of thunder, added his voice to the cosmic symphony of destruction. His lightning split the sky with bolts that illuminated scenes of terror and flight, while his thunder drowned out the screams of the dying. The very air itself became weapon as winds howled with velocity that tore buildings from their foundations. Ninurta opened the dikes that held back the celestial waters, releasing floods that had been contained since the cosmos first took shape. These torrents carried force accumulated over eons, sweeping across the landscape with power that nothing earthly could resist. For 6 days and 7 nights, the combined might of heaven's masters turned against the mortals they had created. Water rose from every source, springs and rivers, clouds and subterranean chambers, even the tears of lesser powers who watched in horror as their achievements dissolved in the universal flood. But the destruction exceeded even its architect's expectations. The violence they had unleashed proved too great for any control, sweeping away not just noisy cities, but the entire infrastructure of civilization. Temples crumbled beneath the assault, their sacred precincts flooded with waters that showed no respect for holy ground. In the highest heaven, the Anunnaki themselves fled in terror from forces they had set in motion. The deluge they had authorized was consuming everything in its path, threatening to unravel the cosmic order they had worked so carefully to establish. "What have we done?" Inanna whispered, her voice barely audible above the roar of universal destruction. "We sought silence and have achieved the quiet of death. We demanded order and have created chaos beyond imagining." Even Enlil began to question the wisdom of his solution as he watched entire regions disappear beneath waters that showed no sign of receding. The noise that had driven him to fury was indeed silenced, but the silence carried a finality that made his victory feel hollow. 7 days after it began, the cosmic violence finally exhausted itself. waters gradually receded, revealing a landscape scoured clean of almost every trace of the civilization that had flourished there. Mud covered the ruins of great cities, while silence reigned where once the sounds of thriving life had created the disturbance that triggered such massive retaliation. In this desolation, a single boat rested on the peak of a mountain that had survived the universal flooding. Ziusudra emerged from his vessel like hope itself taking physical form, his family and the precious cargo of seeds and animals representing the sole remnant of all that had been lost. The righteous king's first act was to build an altar from stones scattered by the retreating waters. Upon this humble sanctuary, he offered sacrifices to the powers who had preserved him through the catastrophe, sending smoke skyward that carried the first pleasant aroma heaven had known since the destruction began. The scent of burning offerings reached the divine assembly like a revelation. Powers who had grown accustomed to regular worship suddenly realized how much they had valued what they had destroyed. The silence they had sought brought not peace, but emptiness, that made their own existence feel meaningless. The mortal remembers his obligations. An observed from his throne, his voice carrying surprise at finding gratitude where he had expected only resentment. Even after losing everything, he honors those who preserved him. Enlil descended from his heights, his fury finally spent in the face of the devastation his storm had wrought. When he discovered that mortals had survived his ultimate solution, his reaction surprised even himself. Relief mixed with anger, gratitude combined with frustration at the failure of his grand design. "How is it that any escaped the waters I unleashed?" he demanded, though his tone lacked the rage that had characterized his recent pronouncements. The god of wisdom stepped forward, his confession carrying both defiance and sorrow. "I could not stand silent while justice drowned beneath the noise of arbitrary authority. The righteous deserved warning, the innocent merited preservation." The confrontation that followed was unlike any previous dispute between the brothers. Enlil's anger was real, but tempered by recognition that total destruction had indeed exceeded reasonable response to the original problem. The wise god's rebellion was acknowledged but forgiven in light of the wisdom his intervention had preserved. From this crisis came a new covenant between heaven and earth. Humanity would be permitted to rebuild their civilization, but under conditions that would prevent future disturbances to celestial peace. Mortals would be granted shorter lifespans, limiting their numbers and reducing their collective impact. Their capabilities would be constrained to levels that served divine purposes without creating divine inconvenience. Most importantly, the relationship between rulers and subjects would be restructured to emphasize distance and respect, rather than intimate cooperation. The age of gods walking daily among mortals was ending, replaced by an era of worship offered upward and blessings flowing downward through carefully controlled channels. As Ziusudra and his family began the long work of restoration, the powers retreated to their respective domains to contemplate the lessons learned through near-universal catastrophe. The cosmos would endure, civilization would be rebuilt, but neither heaven nor earth would ever again be quite the same. Restlessness consumed Inanna as she gazed from her temple in Uruk toward the darkened lands that lay beyond sunlight's reach. The goddess who had stolen civilization's greatest treasures, who commanded love and warfare with equal mastery, found herself drawn to the one realm beyond her influence, the kingdom of the dead ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. What began as idle curiosity grew into burning obsession. Why should any domain exist beyond her authority? Why should her elder sister possess absolute sovereignty, while she, despite recent victories, remained limited to the upper sphere? The very existence of boundaries she could not cross challenged everything the ambitious deity believed about her rightful place in cosmic hierarchy. Abandoning the safety of her celestial palace, she prepared for a journey no living being had ever attempted, a descent into the land of no return, where even divine power was subject to laws older than civilization itself. She adorned herself with 7 sacred regalia: the crown of heaven, the lapis lazuli necklace of truth, the twin beads of fertility, the golden breastplate of power, the golden bracelet of wisdom, the measuring rod of justice, and the robe of queenship. Each piece represented hard-won victories that had elevated her above her original station. "I go to witness funeral rites," she announced to her faithful servant Ninshuba. "If I do not return within 3 days, seek help from the fathers, first from Enlil, then from Nanna, and finally from Enki if the others fail." The journey took her through landscapes that grew progressively more desolate as she approached the boundary between life and death. Colors faded, sounds diminished to whispers, and the very air seemed to thin as she neared the realm where her sister held absolute dominion. 7 gates barred the path to Ereshkigal's throne, each guarded by demons whose loyalty to the Queen of the Dead was absolute. At the first barrier, the Guardian's voice echoed with finality. "Who dares approach the land of no return? What living being seeks passage through gates that open only inward? I am the Queen of heaven and earth," she replied, her voice carrying all the authority accumulated through conquest. "I seek audience with my sister on matters concerning both our realms." "Then bow to the laws governing this domain," the Guardian responded. "None may enter bearing powers of the upper sphere. Surrender your crown and you may pass." The demand struck like a physical blow. Her crown represented more than ornament. It embodied the celestial authority she had fought to claim, but retreat would mean acknowledging limits to her power. With reluctance that burned like acid, she removed the crown and handed it to the gatekeeper. The loss diminished her immediately, though she forced herself to continue toward the second barrier. At each successive gate, the pattern repeated with increasingly painful consequences. Her necklace was stripped away, then her beads, her breastplate, her bracelet, her measuring rod, and finally her robe. With each surrender, her essence diminished, her confidence eroded, her very identity was questioned. By the 7th gate, she stood naked and powerless, stripped of everything that had made her great. The guards who admitted her to Ereshkigal's presence saw not the mighty queen who had outmaneuvered Enki, but a vulnerable being whose ambition had finally encountered insurmountable limits. The Dark Queen sat upon her throne of bone and shadow, her beauty terrible in its perfection, her authority absolute within the realm she had never chosen to rule. She had watched her sisters approach with emotions too complex for simple naming: envy mixed with pity, love complicated by resentment, and beneath it all, the loneliness of one who ruled where joy could never flourish. "Sister," she greeted the naked goddess with voice that carried winter's chill. "You have come far from your palace of pleasure and warfare. What brings the Queen of Love to the land where love dies?" The trial that followed was swift and merciless. In the Underworld, Ereshkigal's word was law beyond appeal, her judgment final beyond reversal. She pronounced sentence with dispassion, born of dealing with the ultimate fate awaiting all living things. "You entered my realm bearing powers that belong to the upper sphere. Such presumption demands the penalty that awaits all who violate the boundaries between life and death." The ambitious deity found herself transformed into a corpse, her essence extinguished like flame exposed to crushing depths. Her body was hung upon a meat hook in the palace's darkest chamber, left to decay like any mortal who had reached their allotted time's end. 3 days passed in the upper realm before Ninshuba recognized her mistress would not return. Following instructions she had hoped never to use, the faithful servant began seeking help from the great powers whose authority might extend into the realm of the dead. Enlil refused her plea with cold logic. She who sought the great below must abide by its laws. The Underworld's queen has acted within her authority, and we cannot challenge her jurisdiction without undermining cosmic order. Inanna offered similar judgment, his cyclic nature making him naturally accepting of endings that preceded renewals. Death comes to all things in their season. Even divine beings must respect boundaries that maintain universal balance. But when Ninshuba reached Enki's palace, she found compassion her previous appeals had lacked. The wise god listened with understanding, born from his own recent moral struggles. The young queen ventured where wisdom counseled against going, he acknowledged, but ambition should not be punished with permanent extinction. Cosmic balance requires her return to the upper realm. From beneath his fingernails, Enki fashioned 2 beings, unlike any creatures that had existed before. The Galatura and Kurgaru, neither male nor female, neither living nor dead, but something between that could pass through the Underworld's barriers without triggering its laws. Go to my sister's realm, he instructed these strange servants. Offer no challenge to her authority. Seek no confrontation with her power. Instead, provide the sympathy her position has always denied her. The creatures departed on their mission, passing through the 7 gates without challenge, because their nature defied the categories upon which the Underworld's laws were based. They found the Dark Queen lamenting in her throne room, her victory bringing satisfaction mixed with unexpected sorrow. "Oh, my heart," she moaned, her voice carrying pain accumulated over eons of isolated rule. The burden of judging souls weighs heavier than the crown I wear. "Your heart pains you," the Galatura acknowledged with genuine compassion. "Your burden troubles you," the Kurgaru added, with understanding that pierced through her surprise at finding sympathy in her realm of sorrow. Moved by recognition she had never received, the Queen of the Dead granted their request for the corpse hanging in her palace depths. But the laws governing her domain demanded substitution. Life for life, essence for essence. Someone must take the restored goddess's place in the land of no return. When the strange servants brought word that release required substitution, Enki's wisdom guided the solution. Dumuzi, beloved of the ambitious deity but absent during her crisis, would serve her sentence. His descent would establish the seasonal cycle, bringing winter's death followed by spring's renewal. The goddess who emerged from death was changed by her experience in ways that would influence all future actions. She had learned that even divine ambition faced ultimate limits, that some boundaries existed for purposes greater than individual desire. But she had also discovered that love could overcome death itself when guided by wisdom and expressed through sacrifice. As she resumed her throne in Uruk, taking up once again the sacred decrees that had elevated her city to greatness, she carried new understanding of cosmic forces governing existence. Power without limits led to destruction, but power exercised with wisdom could achieve miracles that force alone could never accomplish. In Uruk, where Inanna's stolen treasures had transformed clay into the greatest city on earth, a king arose whose very existence challenged the boundaries between mortal and divine. Gilgamesh stood 2/3 celestial, 1/3 human, a hybrid whose nature embodied the complicated relationship between heaven and earth that had developed since the Great Flood's aftermath. His strength surpassed that of ordinary mortals by measures that defied calculation. Temple walls rose at his command with speed that amazed even their builders. His voice could be heard across the entire city when he chose to address his subjects from the palace steps. Warriors from distant lands traveled to Uruk, seeking the honor of facing him in combat, though none had ever emerged victorious from such encounters. But power brought loneliness that no amount of adulation could ease. Gilgamesh ruled without equal, commanded without question, and achieved without effort, until the very completeness of his dominance became the source of his greatest torment. What meaning could existence hold for one who faced no worthy challenges? The answer came in the form of Enkidu, a wild man fashioned by the gods to serve as companion and rival to the king, whose isolation was becoming dangerous to cosmic order. Their first meeting shook the foundations of Uruk as two forces of nearly equal magnitude clashed in combat that lasted from sunrise to sunset. When exhaustion finally forced them to acknowledge each other's worth, friendship was born that would become the standard by which all future bonds between heroes would be measured. Together, they embarked upon adventures that carried their fame across the known world, slaying monsters that threatened civilization, exploring territories that had never known the footstep of civilized beings. But their greatest triumph contained the seeds of their ultimate tragedy. When Inanna approached Gilgamesh with an offer of marriage that would have elevated him to full divinity, the king's response revealed the pride that would prove his downfall. "What mortal would profit from becoming your husband?" he demanded, his voice carrying disdain that made the goddess's eyes blaze with fury. "Your love brings destruction to all who receive it. Your passion devours those who dare to match it. I have seen the fate of your previous consorts, broken, abandoned, transformed into objects of pity rather than sources of joy." The rejection struck the proud deity like a physical blow. No mortal had ever dared to refuse her advances, to question her desirability, to suggest that her love might be anything less than the ultimate blessing. Her rage manifested immediately as she called upon her father, and to provide instruments of vengeance. From the celestial heights descended the Bull of Heaven, a creature whose very breath could kill hundreds, whose hooves could crack the earth itself. The monster's rampage through Uruk's streets sent citizens fleeing in terror as buildings collapsed and the ground split beneath its supernatural weight. But the beast had not reckoned with the friendship that bound king and wild man together. Fighting as one entity, with two bodies, they coordinated their attacks with precision that spoke to bonds deeper than mere companionship. Enkidu seized the bull's mighty tail, while his friend drove a sword between its horns, bringing down the divine monster through courage and cooperation. Their victory celebration proved short-lived. In the aftermath of triumph, Enkidu began experiencing dreams that filled him with dread beyond rational explanation. Night after night, visions came showing him his own death, his descent to the Underworld, his transformation from hero to memory. "The Assembly has decreed," he told his friend, his voice heavy with knowledge too terrible to fully accept. "One of us must pay the price for slaying heaven's beast. The gods have chosen, and I must answer their summons." Illness struck the wild man with supernatural swiftness, draining his incredible strength in days that felt like years to those who watched his decline. Gilgamesh sat beside his dying friend with helplessness that no amount of royal power could overcome, witnessing the approach of the one enemy his strength could not defeat. When death finally claimed Enkidu, taking from the king the only being who had ever understood him completely, grief transformed into obsession that would drive the remainder of his story. If death could claim even one so mighty as his friend, what hope did any mortal possess of achieving lasting significance? There must be a way, he declared to the empty palace chambers that no longer echoed with his friends' laughter. Somewhere in this vast cosmos, someone possesses the secret that could grant eternal life. I shall find it, whatever the cost. The quest that followed took him beyond the boundaries of the known world, into territories where ordinary mortals could not survive. He crossed deserts that burned like furnaces during the day and froze like winter mountains at night. He climbed peaks that scraped the undersides of heaven itself, their summits shrouded in clouds that had never known earthly touch. At the edge of the world, he encountered Shamash, the sun deity whose daily journey took him beyond the borders of mortal existence. The radiant god's response to the king's plea revealed the fundamental difference between divine and human nature. Why do you pursue what was never meant for mortal hands? The solar deity asked, his light too brilliant for direct observation. The gods alone possess eternal life, because eternity requires wisdom that mortals cannot contain. Your time is brief precisely because brevity gives meaning to mortal achievement. But the grieving king refused to accept such limitations. Pressing beyond even Shamash's domain, he reached the edge of existence where Utnapishtim dwelt, the flood survivor who had received immortality as reward for preserving life through cosmic catastrophe. The ancient man's appearance shocked even one prepared for wonders. Centuries had passed since the deluge, yet Utnapishtim retained the vitality of one in his prime, his eyes holding memories of ages that stretched back to civilization's earliest days. You seek what cannot be given, the immortal warned, his voice carrying wisdom accumulated through endless years. The assembly granted me eternal life under circumstances that will never be repeated. The Great Flood was unique, its survivors chosen for specific purposes that your situation does not match. Gilgamesh refused to accept defeat, even from one who spoke with authority of personal experience. Through persistent pleading, he convinced the ancient survivor to reveal the location of a plant growing in the depths of the cosmic ocean, a herb that could restore youth to any who consumed it, granting them renewed vitality that approached true immortality. The hero's descent into those primordial waters tested every aspect of his legendary strength, fighting currents that could sweep away mountains, holding his breath for periods that would have killed ordinary mortals. He finally grasped the thorny plant that promised escape from mortality's limitations. But even as victory seemed within reach, the cosmos revealed one final lesson about the nature of divine justice. During his return journey, exhausted from his underwater ordeal, the king paused at a spring to refresh himself. While he bathed, a serpent emerged from the depths to consume the precious plant, shedding its old skin in the process and gaining the renewal that the hero had sought for himself. The sight of his ultimate prize disappearing into the creature's maw broke something fundamental within the mighty king's spirit. All his strength, all his courage, all his determination had proven insufficient to overcome the limitations that separated mortal from divine existence. Returning to Uruk empty-handed, but wiser than when he had departed, the chastened ruler began to understand the lesson the cosmos had been teaching through his ordeal. Immortality belonged to the heavenly powers, because they possessed the wisdom and responsibility to use it properly. Mortals were granted brief lives precisely because brevity forced them to use their time meaningfully. His remaining years were devoted to building monuments that would preserve his memory long after his body returned to the earth from which it had been fashioned. The walls of Uruk rose higher under his direction, their strength designed to outlast the ages. Epic poems were commissioned to preserve the story of his friendship with Enkidu, ensuring that love could triumph over death through the power of enduring memory. When death finally came for the great king, He faced it with acceptance, born of understanding, rather than the desperate resistance that had characterized his earlier struggles. His legacy lived on in the stories told around evening fires, in the walls that protected his city, and in the recognition that mortal greatness lay not in achieving divine immortality, but in using human limitations to create meaning that transcended individual existence. The quest that had begun in grief and rebellion ended in wisdom and acceptance. Through his failure to achieve divine status, the hero had discovered something more valuable: the knowledge that mortality possessed its own form of immortality through the legacy of noble actions and enduring love. Above in the celestial assembly, the powers observed his transformation with complex emotions. His challenge to their exclusive possession of eternal life had ultimately reinforced rather than threatened their authority, demonstrating that some boundaries served necessary purposes rather than arbitrary restrictions. The age of heroes seeking to transcend their nature was drawing to a close, replaced by an era of acceptance that would find greatness within rather than beyond the limitations that defined each being's proper role in cosmic order. 7 thrones of obsidian rose from the depths of Ereshkigal's palace, each carved from stone that had never known sunlight's touch. Upon these seats of judgment sat the Anunnaki of the Underworld, the great ones who had accepted the solemn duty of determining the fate of every soul that crossed from life into death. Their authority in this shadowed realm was absolute, their decisions final beyond any possibility of appeal. Unlike their celestial counterparts who governed the bright realms above, these arbiters of final destiny were expressions of terrible impartiality. They had witnessed the passage of countless souls through their domain, kings and beggars, heroes and cowards, the virtuous and the wicked, all reduced to the same fundamental vulnerability when stripped of earthly power and pretense. Namtar, herald of death itself, stood before the assembled judges, reading from tablets that recorded every deed performed by mortals during their brief time above. His voice carried no emotion as he recited the evidence upon which eternal judgments would be based: acts of courage and cowardice, moments of compassion and cruelty, the accumulated choices that defined each soul's true nature. "Behold the record of one who ruled justly," he announced, his words echoing through chambers where echo never died. This king fed the hungry when abundance blessed his land, defended the weak when strength was needed, honored the sacred obligations that bound mortal to divine authority. The 7 judges conferred in whispers that sounded like wind through dry bones, their deliberation brief but thorough. Justice in the underworld operated with efficiency that the upper realms sometimes lacked. No political considerations complicated their decisions. No personal relationships influenced their verdicts. To the fields of peace they decreed in unison, their combined voices creating harmonies that beautiful in their finality. Let this soul dwell where sweet waters flow, and eternal spring provides rest from the labors of earthly existence. But not all who appeared before the tribunal received such merciful judgment. Namtar's records also preserved evidence of those who had violated the sacred trust between rulers and subjects, who had broken oaths sworn in the presence of divine witnesses, who had stolen from temples or shown disrespect to the powers that governed their existence. "This one took bread from widows," the herald continued, his tone unchanged, whether recounting virtue or vice. "This soul claimed ownership of waters that belonged to all people, diverted irrigation channels to serve personal greed, while neighbors' crops withered in artificial drought. For such violations, the judge's verdict carried weight that crushed hope like stones falling upon fragile flowers. These souls would face punishment proportionate to their crimes, not eternal torment, for even justice recognized limits, but suffering sufficient to balance the scales they had tipped through selfish action. The cosmic bureaucracy that governed this process had been established with the same careful attention to detail that characterized all Anunnaki administration. Lesser officials recorded the arrival of each new soul, while scribes maintained detailed records ensuring that no case would be overlooked or judged according to incomplete information. But even this well-ordered system faced disruption when Nergal, Lord of Plague and Warfare, descended to challenge Ereshkigal's absolute authority over her dark domain. His arrival was announced by earthquakes that cracked the Underworld's foundations, his presence bringing the scent of battlefield smoke to chambers that had known only the stillness of eternal rest. The confrontation between Warlord and Death Queen was unlike any conflict the Underworld had witnessed. Where Ereshkigal ruled through the patient authority of natural law, Nergal sought to impose his will through the violent methods that had served him well in the upper realms. Your kingdom lacks the strength that true authority requires, he declared, his voice carrying the crash of weapons meeting shields. Death may be inevitable, but it need not be gentle. Those who violated cosmic order should face punishment that matches their crime's magnitude. The Dark Queen's response revealed why her dominion had remained unchallenged for so long. Violence belongs to the realms above, where passion drives action and change marks the passage of time. Here, justice operates according to principles more enduring than rage, more reliable than the fury that burns bright but quickly exhausts itself. Their dispute escalated beyond mere philosophical disagreement into active conflict that threatened to tear apart the careful balance maintaining underworld order. Nergal's warriors clashed with Ereshkigal's guardians in battles that sent tremors through every level of the cosmic hierarchy. But even as they fought, deeper currents drew them together with attraction that neither had anticipated. The warlord's passionate intensity awakened desires in the Death Queen that her isolated position had never allowed her to explore. Her terrible beauty and absolute authority fascinated the deity whose existence had been defined by conquest and domination. Their eventual union transformed both rulers and their shared domain. Nergal's strength complemented Ereshkigal's wisdom, creating a partnership that made underworld governance more effective than either could have achieved alone. His presence brought decisive action to supplement her patient judgment, while her influence tempered his violent impulses with respect for justice. The 7 judges found their work enhanced by this dual leadership. Complex cases that had previously required extensive deliberation could now be resolved more efficiently through the combined perspectives of war and death. Souls who had lived by violence faced judgment from one who understood its nature, while those who had died peacefully received evaluation from one who knew rest's true value. Meanwhile, the integration of plague into underworld administration created new mechanisms for maintaining cosmic balance. Diseases that had previously struck according to natural patterns now served specific purposes, correcting population growth that exceeded sustainable limits, removing individuals whose continued existence threatened social stability, demonstrating divine displeasure with communities that had forgotten their obligations. This systematic approach to mortality transformed death from random tragedy into purposeful instrument of cosmic governance. The upper realms no longer needed to rely solely on dramatic interventions like the Great Flood to address problems with mortal behavior. Instead, carefully targeted mortality could achieve necessary corrections without disrupting the larger patterns of civilized development. The transformation extended beyond mere administrative efficiency to encompass the very meaning of existence in both realms. Mortals began to understand that their actions carried consequences extending beyond earthly life, that the justice they sometimes escaped above would inevitably find them below. This knowledge influenced behavior in ways that benefited both individual souls and society as a whole. Celestial powers, meanwhile, gained access to information about mortal societies that had previously been unavailable. Through the Underworld's comprehensive records, they could identify trends and problems requiring attention before they reached crisis proportions. The realm of the dead became an essential source of intelligence about the effectiveness of divine governance. But perhaps most significantly, the union between war and death established precedents that would influence relationships throughout the cosmic hierarchy. Their partnership demonstrated that apparent opposites could work together productively, that conflict could lead to cooperation when both parties possessed strength sufficient to command respect. The 7 Anunnaki judges continued their eternal work with enhanced authority and improved procedures. Each soul that appeared before their tribunal received evaluation based on complete information and impartial standards. Their decisions shaped not only individual destinies, but the larger patterns that govern the relationship between earthly actions and eternal consequences. As cycles passed and the Underworld administration reached full efficiency, its influence began extending upward into the realms of the living. Kings consulted oracles about the fate awaiting their souls, while common people modified their behavior based on knowledge of judgment that would follow death. The realm once seen as ending had become transformation, a crucial component in the larger system maintaining cosmic order. Through death, the powers gained ultimate authority over every soul that had ever drawn breath, while mortals learned that earthly existence was merely the first chapter in a story that continued beyond the grave. Cosmic hierarchy had achieved new levels of integration and effectiveness. The age of simple life and death was ending, replaced by an era of comprehensive governance that encompassed every aspect of existence from birth to final judgment and beyond. Empty throne rooms echoed with silence where once celestial laughter had filled palace halls. Across the mortal realm, temples that had regularly hosted heavenly visitors now received only offerings left by faithful priests who maintained rituals for absent masters. The age of direct rule was drawing to a close, though few mortals understood the magnitude of change approaching their civilization. Enlil made the announcement from his palace in Nippur, his voice carrying across the assembly with the finality of laws carved in stone. The time has come for proper distance between heaven and earth. Mortals have proven capable of maintaining the systems we established. Continued interference in their daily affairs serves neither their development nor our dignity. The decision emerged from cycles of careful observation and growing recognition that intimate involvement in human society created more complications than benefits. Each heavenly intervention generated consequences requiring further intervention, creating cycles of dependency that diminished both mortal initiative and celestial authority. They must learn to govern themselves according to principles we have taught, the Lord of Storms continued, his words carrying weight that made even the greatest powers consider their implications carefully. Our presence should inspire rather than direct, guide rather than control, bless rather than manage every detail of earthly existence. Enki's response revealed the mixed emotions this withdrawal stirred among the assembled rulers. Brother speaks wisdom, though wisdom that brings sorrow to those who have enjoyed walking among our mortal children. Their gratitude warmed hearts that had known only the distant respect of celestial peers. The transition that followed was gradual but unmistakable. Where once the great powers had appeared regularly in temple courtyards to receive worship directly, Now they communicated through dreams and omens that required interpretation by trained priests. Where celestial voices had once offered immediate guidance for complex decisions, rulers now consulted sacred texts and performed divination rituals seeking heavenly will. This transformation demanded fundamental changes in how mortal societies organized themselves. Kings could no longer claim direct appointment through personal encounters with the Anunnaki. Instead, they required elaborate coronation ceremonies that invoked cosmic authority through ritual rather than immediate presence. The priesthood assumed new importance as intermediaries between realms that were growing increasingly separate. These sacred servants learned to read signs that revealed celestial intentions, the pattern of oil upon water, the flight of birds across specific portions of sky, the formation of clouds during particular seasons. Through their interpretations, heavenly will continued influencing earthly affairs despite the growing distance. Temple economics underwent corresponding evolution, as offerings that had once been shared in cosmic banquets became sustenance for elaborate religious establishments. Priests required support for their specialized functions, while temple complexes needed maintenance that could preserve sacred spaces worthy of occasional supernatural visitation. Regular festivals became crucial for maintaining connection between realms. During these celebrations, careful reenactment of mythic events temporarily restored the intimacy that had characterized earlier ages. Sacred marriage ceremonies recreated the cosmic unions that had established fertility's foundations, while New Year observances renewed universal order through ritual repetition of creation itself. The great powers found their own existence transformed by withdrawal from direct involvement in mortal affairs. Freed from constant attention to human problems, they could focus on cosmic governance, requiring their unique capabilities, maintaining seasonal cycles, ensuring celestial bodies followed proper courses, preserving fundamental laws that kept existence stable. But distance brought its own complications. Without daily interaction with human society, the rulers gradually lost touch with practical consequences of their decisions. Policies that seemed reasonable from celestial heights sometimes proved disastrous when implemented in the complex reality of mortal civilization. Communication became increasingly dependent upon formal channels that filtered information through multiple layers of interpretation. Royal priests reported to temple hierarchies, who consulted with regional authorities, who eventually conveyed carefully edited summaries to heavenly assemblies that met according to cosmic rather than human schedules. This communication lag created opportunities for misunderstanding that had been impossible during the age of direct rule. Commands issued in response to outdated information sometimes addressed problems that had already resolved themselves, while genuine crises went unrecognized until they had grown beyond easy correction. The wise God, whose understanding encompassed appreciation for unintended consequences, began expressing concerns about the sustainability of their new arrangement. We risk becoming like Anne in his celestial heights, so removed from daily reality that our decisions serve cosmic theory rather than practical necessity. Distance preserves authority, Enlil replied, though his tone suggested some uncertainty about the wisdom of their chosen path. Familiarity breeds the kind of presumption that led to floods and rebellions. Mortals serve us better when they remember our power rather than our personalities. The philosophical debate that followed revealed how profoundly the withdrawal was affecting celestial society itself. Some powers adapted easily to governing from afar, finding satisfaction in the enhanced respect that distance encouraged. Others missed the immediate feedback and personal recognition that direct interaction had provided. Inanna struggled particularly with the new arrangements. Her nature thrived on passionate engagement, whether through love or warfare, and the formal protocols now governing cosmic mortal relations left her feeling isolated from the very realms where her influence was strongest. "How can I guide matters of the heart from celestial remove?" she asked during one assembly session. "Love requires presence. Warfare demands immediate response to changing conditions. These new restrictions serve order but diminish effectiveness." Similar concerns arose among other specialized powers whose domains required responsive management. Agricultural cycles needed adjustment based on local conditions. Justice required understanding of specific circumstances, and fertility demanded attention to individual rather than general needs. Gradually, compromises emerged that balanced the desire for appropriate distance with practical requirements of effective governance. The Anunnaki would continue withdrawing from routine involvement in human affairs, but they would maintain capability for intervention when circumstances truly required celestial attention. Oracle sites were established where specially trained priests could receive more direct communication during genuine emergencies. Sacred groves and temple precincts were designated as neutral ground, where brief supernatural appearances could occur without compromising the dignity that distance was meant to preserve. Dreams became the primary vehicle for ongoing guidance, allowing celestial rulers to influence mortal decisions without appearing personally before human audiences. This method provided flexibility needed for responsive governance while maintaining the mystery that made cosmic authority compelling. As these new systems reached full development, both realms began adapting to relationships that emphasized mutual respect rather than intimate familiarity. Mortals learned to value heavenly attention as a precious gift rather than an expected entitlement, while the powers discovered that governance from appropriate distance could be more effective than constant supervision. The transformation was not without loss. Stories began circulating among humans about the Golden Age when deities had walked among mortals, sharing meals and conversation that had made heaven and earth feel like parts of a unified community. These tales carried nostalgia for intimacy that would never again characterize relationships between the realms. But new forms of connection began developing to replace what had been lost. Sacred literature preserved cosmic wisdom in forms that could be studied and applied long after their original context had passed. Ritual practices maintained spiritual relationships that transcended physical presence. Art and music created expressions of devotion that carried emotional power exceeding mere words. The cosmos was settling into patterns that would characterize all future ages, heaven governing through established principle rather than personal intervention, earth developing according to celestial guidance rather than direct control, and the space between filled with carefully maintained channels of communication that preserved essential unity while respecting necessary boundaries. As the great withdrawal neared completion, the powers looked back upon the age of intimate governance with complex emotions. They had achieved their goal of establishing proper distance and enhanced respect, but success carried costs that none had fully anticipated. The spontaneous joy of shared celebration had given way to formal ceremony. Personal affection had been replaced by institutional reverence, and the warmth of familial relationships had cooled into the measured respect appropriate between ruler and subject. An era of maturity would soon test whether the bonds forged during youth could endure the changed circumstances of cosmic and mortal adulthood. 50 voices rose in perfect harmony as the great assembly convened in the highest heaven, their combined presence creating resonances that vibrated through every level of existence. For the first time since withdrawing from direct earthly rule, all the Anunnaki gathered in full formal session, to address matters that would shape destiny across every realm under their dominion, and presided from his throne of lapis lazuli, his sovereignty absolute, yet tempered by recognition that even supreme power required counsel when addressing matters of universal scope. Around him, the great family he had sired through union with Ki took their positions according to precedents earned through eons of faithful service and demonstrated wisdom. The time has come for comprehensive review, the Sky Lord announced, his voice carrying the weight of infinite distance. Our withdrawal from direct earthly involvement has created new circumstances requiring formal recognition. We must establish clear principles governing how heavenly will shall influence mortal affairs in this age of necessary separation. Enlil rose from his position beside the throne, storm winds swirling around him as he addressed the assembled powers. The experiment in distance has succeeded beyond our original expectations. Mortals have proven capable of maintaining civilizations without constant supervision, while we have gained perspective that intimate involvement had obscured. His report detailed the transformation that had occurred since the Great Withdrawal began. Cities continued flourishing under human leadership, guided by established law rather than personal instruction. Agricultural cycles proceeded according to natural patterns, enhanced by ritual observance rather than direct intervention. Justice was administered through courts that applied principles the powers had established, rather than seeking case-by-case guidance from heavenly tribunals. Most significantly, the Lord of Storms continued. Respect for our dominion has increased rather than diminished. Distance has restored the awe that familiarity had eroded, while formal channels of communication have elevated the significance of our guidance. Enki presented a different perspective, his wisdom encompassing appreciation for both benefits and costs of their new arrangement. Brother speaks truth about enhanced respect and improved efficiency, but we must acknowledge what has been lost in achieving these gains. The spontaneous joy of shared celebration, the immediate understanding that came from personal interaction, the warmth of relationships that transcended mere governance, these too had value. The debate that followed revealed fundamental differences in how the assembled powers viewed their relationship with the mortal realm. Some, led by Enlil's faction, emphasized the practical advantages of rule from appropriate distance, enhanced respect, reduced complications, freedom to focus on universal rather than local concerns. Others, influenced by Enki's perspective, mourned the loss of intimacy that had made their rule feel personally meaningful, rather than merely administratively efficient. They argued that effective governance required understanding that could only come from direct experience with the consequences of heavenly decisions. Inanna's contribution reflected her unique position as one whose domain required ongoing engagement with mortal passions. Love and warfare cannot be managed from heavenly remove, she declared, her voice carrying the intensity that characterized all her pronouncements. These forces require immediate response to changing circumstances, personal understanding of individual needs. Her words sparked broader consideration of how different aspects of existence required different approaches to governance. Agricultural fertility could operate according to seasonal patterns established once and maintained through natural cycles. Justice could function through laws codified in permanent form and applied by trained judges. But matters involving human emotion and conflict needed more flexible management. Utu offered the perspective of one whose domain had adapted successfully to the new arrangements. Truth remains constant, whether revealed through personal presence or formal pronouncement, he observed. his steady radiance lending weight to his words. Justice serves its purpose equally well when administered through established courts as when decreed by immediate intervention. The sun god's experience suggested that some aspects of heavenly rule were actually enhanced by distance, gaining dignity and permanence that personal involvement sometimes compromised. Laws carved in stone carried more weight than instructions given in casual conversation, while formal ceremonies created more lasting impressions than informal encounters. As the debate continued, consensus began emerging around a comprehensive framework that would govern future relationships between heaven and earth. Rather than maintaining uniform distance across all domains, the powers would tailor their involvement to match the requirements of different aspects of existence. Routine governance would continue operating through established channels, laws administered by human courts, agricultural cycles following natural patterns, seasonal observances conducted according to traditional forms. This approach preserved the dignity and efficiency that withdrawal had achieved, while ensuring that mortal societies could function without constant supervision. But mechanisms would be maintained for extraordinary intervention when circumstances truly required direct action from the powers. Natural disasters threatening entire civilizations, violations of universal law that human tribunals could not address, crises that exceeded mortal capacity for resolution. These situations would justify temporary suspension of normal distance protocols. The Assembly also addressed the question of succession and continuity that the withdrawal had raised. As the powers became less personally involved in daily governance, how would their dominion be transmitted to future generations of both heavenly and earthly rulers? And solution reflected the wisdom accumulated through ages of universal administration. Let our rule be embodied in institutions that transcend individual personalities, he decreed. Sacred kingship shall carry heavenly legitimacy through ritual rather than personal appointment. Priesthoods shall maintain connection between realms through established procedure rather than casual encounter. This institutionalization of power would ensure that governance could continue even as the powers became increasingly focused on matters transcending immediate earthly concerns. Kings would rule by heavenly right, confirmed through coronation ceremonies that invoked blessing without requiring personal presence. Priests would serve as intermediaries, whose legitimacy derived from position rather than personal relationship with individual deities. The formal decrees that emerged from this great assembly were carved in tablets of imperishable stone, their provisions designed to govern relationships between heaven and earth until the end of time itself. These documents established the legal framework within which all future interactions would occur, providing stability that personal arrangements could never match. Most importantly, the Assembly reaffirmed the hierarchy that had governed existence since the first emergence from primordial waters, and supreme sovereignty was acknowledged as eternal and unquestionable. The great powers' dominion over their respective domains was confirmed as absolute within established boundaries. The 50 Anunnakis' collective responsibility for decreeing fate was recognized as fundamental to universal order. But alongside these affirmations of traditional power, the Assembly also recognized new realities that the Age of Withdrawal had created. Mortals had developed capabilities and institutions that deserved respect rather than mere supervision. Human wisdom, while limited compared to heavenly understanding, had proven sufficient for managing many aspects of civilized existence. The relationship between heaven and earth was maturing from one of parent and child to something approaching partnership between senior and junior rulers. Mortals would never achieve equality with their creators, but they had earned the right to govern themselves according to principles established by universal law, rather than detailed instruction from supervisors above. As the Great Assembly concluded its deliberations, the powers looked toward a future characterized by stability, dignity, and mutual respect between realms. They had successfully navigated the transition from intimate involvement to appropriate distance, establishing frameworks that could endure whatever challenges lay ahead. The age of experimental governance was ending. The age of established law was beginning, with institutions and procedures that would maintain order across vast expanses of time and space. Above and below, the universe prepared to operate according to principles that honored both heavenly sovereignty and mortal capacity, ensuring that harmony would prevail, even as the world continued its eternal development toward ever greater complexity and sophistication. Gold glinted on temple altars as the last rays of divine presence flickered through sacred precincts across Mesopotamia. In Babylon's towering Esagila, in Uruk's ancient Inanna, in Nippur's venerable Ekur, priests maintained elaborate rituals that preserved connections to powers whose attention had shifted beyond earthly concerns. These temples had become humanity's final anchors to the age when heaven and earth shared common ground. The high priest of Marduk climbed the seven-tiered ziggurat as his predecessors had done for countless generations. But now his prayers echoed through empty chambers, where once the god's voice had provided immediate response. Sacred statues received offerings that had once been shared at banquets with living deities, while incense carried petitions towards sky that seemed increasingly silent. Festivals that marked each season assumed crucial importance as communities gathered to preserve memories of the golden age when the Anunnaki had walked among mortals. During New Year celebrations, elaborate processions reenacted creation's cosmic drama. Citizens wore masks representing primordial forces, while priests performed roles of An, Enlil, and Enki in pageants reminding all observers of the powers governing existence. "We must not let them fade from memory," declared the high priestess of Inanna's temple in Uruk, her voice carrying across courtyards where statues stood in place of the goddess's living presence. "Though she no longer appears before us, her essence dwells within these sacred precincts. Through proper observance, we maintain the bonds that time and distance threaten to sever." Sacred marriage ceremonies continued the ancient traditions that had once involved actual participation from the powers themselves. The king still took the role of shepherd god. The priestess still embodied the fertility goddess, but their union now represented rather than literally enacted the cosmic forces ensuring the land's abundance. Symbolism replaced reality as communities adapted to governing powers who remained present in spirit rather than flesh. Dreams became the primary channel through which the Anunnaki communicated with their earthly subjects. Specially trained priests learned to interpret the visions that came during ritual sleep within temple sanctuaries. These dream messages required careful analysis, their meanings often obscured by symbols that reflected the growing distance between heavenly and human understanding. King Nebuchadnezzar recorded such a vision in tablets that would survive millennia. "In my sleep, the Lord of Wisdom appeared, but his form was changed, transparent like morning air. His words came not as speech, but as knowledge appearing within my mind. He showed me cities yet to be built, laws yet to be written. But when I awakened, the details faded like water through fingers." Oracle sites gained prominence as locations where the veil between realms remained thin enough for occasional direct communication. At sacred groves, where Enki's springs still bubbled from ancient sources. At mountain peaks, where Enlil's winds carried messages from the heights. At desert sanctuaries where Inanna's star blazed brightest. These places became pilgrimage destinations for rulers seeking guidance on matters exceeding human wisdom. The priesthood evolved into sophisticated institutions that preserved not only ritual practices, but the accumulated knowledge of ages when deities had shared their understanding freely. Temple libraries housed tablets containing everything, from agricultural techniques taught by Ninhursag to mathematical principles revealed by Nabu. These collections became universities where human wisdom grew through study of lessons originally learned at the feet of the powers themselves. But even as these preservation efforts continued, subtle changes in the natural world suggested that the withdrawal was accelerating beyond mere administrative convenience. Seasonal patterns that had once adjusted automatically to regional needs now followed rigid schedules that sometimes brought drought when rain was needed, floods when dry weather would better serve growing crops. The agricultural priests of Enlil's temples noticed it first. Their weather predictions, once reliable as sunrise, began failing with troubling frequency. Storms arrived without the usual atmospheric signs, while expected rains passed by regions that had prepared for their blessing. The fine-tuned responsiveness that had characterized the early age of direct rule was giving way to broader patterns that served general rather than specific needs. Similar disconnections appeared in other domains. Justice, once calibrated through regular consultation with Utu's representatives, began operating according to written codes that could not account for every circumstance requiring judgment. Love and warfare, Inanna's twin provinces, followed patterns established in earlier ages, rather than responding to the unique dynamics of contemporary situations. Enki's wisdom still flowed through the springs and rivers that carried life across the land, but the immediate problem-solving that had once characterized his involvement became rare. His solutions to new challenges arrived through slowly spreading innovations, rather than direct instruction, requiring generations to implement, rather than immediate application. The powers had not abandoned their creation, but their attention had shifted toward maintaining the larger systems that kept existence stable across vast periods of time. They governed seasons rather than individual harvests, maintained justice as a principle rather than deciding specific cases, ensured fertility as a cosmic force rather than blessing particular unions. This transition from specific to general oversight created opportunities for human initiative that had not existed during the age of direct rule. Mortal rulers began developing their own solutions to problems that might once have required heavenly consultation. Craftsmen innovated techniques that extended beyond what they had learned from their original instructors. Scholars began asking questions that pushed the boundaries of knowledge established during the era of immediate access to wisdom. But success in self-governance came with the recognition that humanity was truly assuming responsibility for its own destiny. The safety net of immediate assistance was being withdrawn as the powers trusted their creation to manage its own affairs according to principles they had established but would no longer actively supervise. Kings began commissioning monuments that would preserve their achievements for future generations, who might never witness direct intervention from the powers. The Code of Hammurabi carved justice into stone that would outlast any human memory, while architectural marvels rose to heights that challenged the sky itself, creating permanent testaments to mortal capability. Literary works began appearing that captured not only the deeds of heroes, but the wisdom accumulated through human experience. The Epic of Gilgamesh preserved lessons about mortality and meaning that transcended the specific circumstances of its protagonist's life. Creation myths recorded in cuneiform ensured that future generations would understand their origins, even if they never witnessed the powers who had shaped their world. As the final age of direct presence drew toward its close, both heaven and earth prepared for a relationship characterized by institutional rather than personal connections. The temples would endure as focal points for worship and wisdom. The priesthoods would continue as custodians of ancient knowledge, and the festivals would preserve memories of the golden time when deities had walked among mortals. But the spontaneous encounters, the immediate responses, the intimate conversations that had made the early ages feel like a family gathering were becoming history preserved in stone and story, rather than living experience renewed with each generation. The age of wonder was ending. The age of responsibility was about to begin, as humanity learned to honor its creators through independence rather than dependence, through achievement rather than mere obedience, through memory rather than expectation of continued presence. Above in their heavenly halls, the Anunnaki watched this transition with emotions too complex for simple description. Pride in their creation's maturity, mixed with nostalgia for the intimacy that success had necessarily cost them both. Stars wheeled in their appointed courses as the 50 Anunnaki took their seats in the hall that existed beyond time, beyond space, beyond the reach of mortal understanding. Here, in the highest heaven where the first council had met when cosmos was young, the great powers maintained their endless watch over all they had created. The assembly that had begun with emergence from primordial waters continued its work, governing destiny with wisdom accumulated through ages of triumph and trial, and presided from his throne of imperishable light, his gaze encompassing past, present, and future in a single timeless moment. Around him, the family he had sired through union with Kai maintained the relationships forged in creation's dawn. Their bonds deepened rather than weakened by the challenges they had faced together. The cosmic hierarchy that had emerged from chaos remained stable, tested by flood and rebellion, refined by withdrawal and wisdom. "Behold what we have accomplished," the Sky Lord spoke, his voice carrying satisfaction earned through eons of careful stewardship. "From the void of Namu's waters, we have fashioned realms of beauty and purpose. From the clay of earth, we have shaped beings capable of growth and achievement. From the chaos of competing wills, we have built order that endures." Below their celestial heights, the world continued according to patterns they had established, but no longer needed to supervise directly. Cities rose and fell in cycles that served larger purposes. Kings ruled according to justice they had codified in unchanging law. Priests maintained temples that preserved connections across growing distances. Humanity had learned to honor its creators through achievement rather than dependence. Enlil reported on the atmospheric systems that continued functioning according to his original design. Seasons followed their appointed rounds, bringing rain when the earth required moisture, withholding it when the soil needed rest. His storms still carved new channels for the waters that Enki supplied, while his winds carried seeds to locations where life could flourish under proper conditions. The mortals have proven worthy of our instruction. The Lord of Earth and Air observed with approval that had replaced his earlier frustrations. They maintain the irrigation networks we taught them to build, honor the agricultural cycles we established, govern themselves according to principles we revealed. Distance has bred competence rather than neglect. The God of wisdom nodded agreement, though his expression carried the complexity that characterized all his judgments. They have indeed grown beyond our initial expectations, developing innovations that extend our original teachings in directions we had not anticipated. Their independence brings both pride and a peculiar form of loneliness. Inanna's presence blazed with satisfaction at humanity's achievements in the domains she had claimed. Love and warfare continued driving human development, building civilizations through passion while defending them through courage. The powers she had stolen from Enki's treasury now flourished in forms that exceeded even her ambitious imagination. They create art that rivals the beauty of our cosmic designs, she reported, her voice carrying wonder at mortal capability. Their poetry preserves our deeds in verses that will endure longer than bronze, while their music echoes the harmonies we sang when existence was young. In honoring us, they have become worthy of honor themselves. Utu's steady radiance illuminated the justice that continued operating according to his enduring principles. Courts throughout the mortal realm applied laws derived from his cosmic standards, while scholars studied ethical questions with dedication that pleased their celestial teacher. Truth revealed itself through human investigation as surely as through his daily journey across the sky. Nanna's cycles continued marking time's passage, his waxing and waning light providing the rhythm within which all earthly activities found their proper sequence. Festivals celebrating the powers occurred according to his calendar, while agricultural activities followed patterns he had established when the first cities learned to cultivate abundance from wilderness. Each member of the assembly contributed reports that revealed the success of their great experiment in creating intelligent life. The beings they had fashioned from clay and breath had not only survived, but flourished, developing capabilities that enhanced rather than diminished the cosmic order their creators had established. But the gathering also acknowledged what had been lost in achieving this success. The spontaneous joy of shared festivals, the immediate satisfaction of direct worship, the warmth of relationships that had transcended the formal boundaries between creator and creation. These pleasures belonged to memory rather than ongoing experience. Perhaps, reflected Ereshkigal from her position among the judges, loss serves purposes we had not initially understood. The mortality we granted our creations gives meaning to their achievements that immortality could not provide. Their awareness of limited time drives them to accomplish more than unending existence might inspire. Her words sparked contemplation among powers who had never experienced the urgency that characterized mortal existence. They had created beings whose brief lives generated intensity of purpose that their own deathless nature sometimes lacked. In accepting limitations, humanity had discovered forms of greatness that immortality alone could not achieve. The assembly's attention turned toward the future, stretching endlessly before them. Their withdrawal from direct earthly involvement had succeeded beyond all expectations, creating stable systems that could function without constant supervision while preserving essential connections between heaven and earth. Temples would continue serving as focal points where mortals could honor their creators through ritual and offering. Priesthoods would maintain the knowledge necessary to interpret signs and omens through which the powers communicated when circumstances required their attention. Festivals would preserve memories of the Golden Age, while celebrating continued blessings that made civilized life possible. But the age of walking among mortals had ended, replaced by governance from appropriate distance that served both realms more effectively than intimate involvement had provided. The powers would continue their perpetual oversight, ensuring that seasons followed proper patterns, that justice prevailed over chaos, that the fundamental laws supporting existence remained stable. Kings would rise and fall according to their merit and the needs of their times, but kingship itself would endure as an institution carrying heavenly legitimacy. Cities would grow and decline as circumstances demanded, but the principles of civilized governance would persist. Individual mortals would live their brief spans and pass into Ereshkigal's realm, but humanity as a whole would continue developing according to the potential their creators had recognized from the beginning. We have given them the greatest gift in our power to bestow, and declared as the assembly prepared to conclude its unending session. Not merely life, but the capacity to create meaning within the boundaries of mortality. Not simply existence, but the opportunity to achieve greatness through their own efforts, guided by wisdom we have provided. The 50 voices rose once more in harmonies that resonated through every level of creation, their combined song celebrating achievements that had transformed chaos into order, potential into actuality, dream into enduring reality. They had emerged from Namu's waters as competing forces and had learned to work together for purposes greater than individual ambition. Above in their timeless assembly, the Anunnaki continued their watch over the cosmos they had shaped through wisdom, courage, and the willingness to change when change served justice. Below in the realm of mortals, humanity pursued its destined path toward achievements that would honor both creators and creation. And so, the Great Ones continued their rule, shaping the fate of kings and nations for all time. Their names preserved in sacred stone, their power flowing through temple and palace, their assembly lasting as the stars themselves. The story that had begun in darkness had found its culmination in light that would never fade, order that would never fail, and love that connected all things across the vast distances separating heaven from earth. The Anunnaki had completed their greatest work, not the creation of the cosmos, but the creation of beings capable of appreciating the cosmos they had been given to inhabit. In the highest heaven and the humblest temple, in the courses of stars and the beating of human hearts, the deathless assembly continued its governance, ensuring that the bonds forged in creation's dawn would endure until time itself reached its appointed end. And in the cities of Sumer, where scribes carved these sacred stories into clay tablets that would survive millennia, the first civilization preserved for all humanity, the memory of when heaven and earth were one, when the Great Ones walked among mortals, and when the foundations of all future kingdoms were laid in the fertile valleys between the rivers.